Danny Vance had seen a lot of things in his 6 years as a combat medic. He had patched up soldiers on burning moons. He had pulled shrapnel from screaming Marines in the belly of warships. He had held the hands of dying men and told them everything would be okay, even when he knew it wouldn't. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to happen on a cold Tuesday morning above Kepler 22b. The starship Resolute Dawn hung in orbit like a sleeping giant. Danny stood in the shuttle bay, checking his medical kit for the third time. Around him, 12 cadets from the Terran Defense Academy were putting on their gear. They were young, most of them barely 20 years old. Their eyes were bright with excitement. Their movements were eager but clumsy. They had no idea what real combat felt like, and Danny hoped they would never have to find out. The mission was supposed to be simple. An old cargo freighter had been drifting near the orbital station for weeks. Command wanted the cadets to practice boarding procedures on it. They would go in, secure the ship, and come back. Easy. Safe. A training exercise that would look good on their records. Danny watched the cadets as they lined up near the shuttle. Cadet Amy Lawson was checking her rifle with careful hands. She was small and quiet, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Cadet Kevin Torres stood beside her, cracking jokes to hide his nervousness. He was tall and loud, the kind of person who filled every room he entered. Behind them, Ryan Shaw was reading something on his datapad, his face serious and focused. Megan Price and Nathan Cole were arguing about something in low voices. Lisa Reyes stood alone near the shuttle door, staring out at the stars. Danny walked over to them and cleared his throat. He told them to stay calm and follow their training. He said the freighter was empty and there was nothing to worry about. He reminded them that he would be right there with them if anything went wrong. The cadets nodded and climbed into the shuttle. Danny followed them inside and took his seat near the back. The engines hummed to life, and the shuttle lifted off the deck and flew toward the drifting freighter. The trip took 15 minutes. Danny spent most of it watching the cadets. Some of them were talking quietly. Others were checking their weapons again and again. A few just stared at the walls, lost in thought. Danny remembered feeling the same way before his first real mission. The fear, the excitement, the strange feeling that everything was about to change. The shuttle docked with the freighter without any problems. The airlock hissed open, and the cadets moved inside in a neat formation. Danny stayed at the back, his medical kit ready. The freighter's corridors were dark and cold. Emergency lights flickered on the walls. The air smelled like rust and old metal. For the first few minutes, everything was quiet. The cadets moved through the ship, checking rooms and marking their progress on their datapads. Danny started to relax. Maybe this really would be just another boring training exercise. Then Lisa Reyes stopped walking. She held up her hand and pointed at something on the floor. Danny moved closer and looked down. It was a footprint. Fresh. Made by something that wasn't human. Before Danny could say anything, the walls exploded. Plasma bolts tore through the corridor from both sides. The cadets screamed and dove for cover. Danny hit the ground and rolled behind a metal crate. His ears were ringing. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He looked up and saw them. Vithrak. Tall, insectoid aliens with hard shells and 4 arms. Their eyes glowed red in the darkness. They moved fast. Faster than anything that size should move. And they were everywhere. The cadets tried to fight back. Kevin Torres fired his rifle and hit one of the Vithrak in the chest. The alien stumbled, but didn't fall. Amy Lawson shot another one in the head, and it dropped to the ground. But there were too many of them. For every one that fell, 2 more appeared. Danny watched in horror as cadets started going down. Amy took a piece of shrapnel to her leg and collapsed against the wall. Kevin was hit in the chest by a plasma bolt and fell backward, his eyes wide with shock. Megan Price was thrown across the corridor by an explosion. Nathan Cole tried to drag her to safety, but a Vithrak grabbed him and slammed him into the floor. Danny's training kicked in. He stopped thinking and started moving. He grabbed his medical kit and ran toward Amy. She was bleeding badly, her face pale and twisted with pain. He pulled her up and threw her over his shoulder. She cried out, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He ran toward the shuttle bay, shouting at the surviving cadets to follow him. Ryan Shaw was still firing at the Vithrak, his hands shaking but his aim steady. Lisa Reyes was crouched behind a pillar, her rifle empty. A few others were scattered around the corridor, frozen with fear. Danny reached the shuttle bay and put Amy down near the airlock. He looked back at the corridor. The Vithrak were getting closer. The cadets were still out there. Wounded. Dying. Alone. He didn't think about what he was doing. He just turned around and ran back into the fire. The corridor was a nightmare of smoke and screaming. Danny found Kevin Torres lying in a pool of blood. He grabbed the young man's arm and started dragging him toward the shuttle bay. A plasma bolt flew past his head, so close he could feel the heat. He didn't stop. He made it back to the shuttle bay and put Kevin down next to Amy. Both of them were unconscious now. Both of them were still breathing. That was enough. Danny looked at the corridor again. More cadets were still out there. He could hear them calling for help. He could hear the Vithrak getting closer. He took a deep breath and ran back in. The next few minutes were a blur of pain and fear. Danny moved through the corridor like a man possessed. He found Megan Price under a collapsed beam and pulled her free. He carried Nathan Cole on his back while the young man screamed in agony. He dragged 2 more cadets, whose names he couldn't remember, through a wall of fire. Each trip was harder than the last. Each time he went back, there were more Vithrak and fewer places to hide. But he kept going. He couldn't stop. Not while there were still people out there who needed him. On his 5th trip, he saw Lisa Reyes. She was pinned behind a crate, surrounded by 3 Vithrak. She was out of ammunition. She was crying. Danny raised his pistol and fired. 2 of the Vithrak went down. The 3rd turned toward him, its red eyes burning with hatred. Danny fired again, but the bolt went wide. The alien charged at him. Danny didn't run. He stood his ground and waited. When the Vithrak was close enough, he ducked under its claws and drove his knife into its throat. The alien screamed and fell. Danny grabbed Lisa and started dragging her toward the shuttle bay. His legs were shaking. His vision was blurring. He could feel blood running down his side from a wound he didn't remember getting. He made it to the shuttle bay just as the rescue teams from the Resolute Dawn breached the freighter. Marines poured through the airlock, their weapons blazing. The Vithrak retreated into the darkness. Danny put Lisa down next to the other cadets and tried to stand. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees, then to his side. The last thing he saw before everything went black was Amy Lawson, opening her eyes and looking at him. She whispered something he couldn't hear. Then the darkness took him. The freighter was dying. Its walls groaned like a wounded animal. Sparks flew from broken wires. Smoke filled the corridors so thick that Danny could barely see his own hands. But he kept moving. He always kept moving. The first time Danny went back into that corridor, he thought he was going to die. The Vithrak were everywhere. Their red eyes glowed through the smoke like angry stars. Their claws scraped against the metal floors as they hunted for survivors. Every shadow could be hiding one of them. Every sound could be his last warning. But Danny had made a promise to himself a long time ago. He had promised that he would never leave anyone behind. Not while he could still walk. Not while he could still breathe. So he pushed the fear down into his stomach and focused on the job. Amy Lawson was the first one he saved. She was small enough that he could carry her on his shoulder without too much trouble. The shrapnel in her leg had torn through muscle and bone, and she was losing blood fast. Danny ran through the corridor with her body bouncing against his back. He could hear her whimpering with each step, but she didn't scream. She was stronger than she looked. He put her down in the shuttle bay and wrapped a tourniquet around her leg. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, but she grabbed his hand and squeezed it. She told him not to leave the others. He nodded and ran back into the smoke. Kevin Torres was harder to reach. He had fallen behind a collapsed bulkhead, his chest armor cracked and smoking. A plasma bolt had punched through his ribs and burned something inside him. Danny could smell the damage before he saw it. He grabbed Kevin's arms and started pulling. The bulkhead shifted as Danny worked. Metal groaned and sparks flew. For a moment, Danny thought the whole thing was going to come down on top of them. But he kept pulling. He didn't have time to be careful. Every second that passed was another second Kevin might not survive. Danny dragged Kevin through the corridor while the young man drifted in and out of consciousness. Twice, Danny had to stop and hide behind debris as Vithrak patrols passed by. He held his breath and pressed his hand over Kevin's mouth to keep him quiet. The aliens were so close that Danny could smell them. They smelled like burning plastic and something else, something alien and wrong. When Danny finally reached the shuttle bay with Kevin, his arms were shaking and his lungs were burning. He put the cadet down next to Amy and checked his wounds. The chest injury was bad. Really bad. Danny did what he could with his medical kit. But he knew Kevin needed a real surgeon. He needed a hospital. He needed to get off this ship. Danny stood up and looked at the corridor again. The smoke was getting thicker. The sounds of fighting were getting closer. Somewhere in that darkness, more cadets were waiting for him. He went back in. Megan Price was unconscious when Danny found her. An explosion had thrown her against a wall and broken something in her back. Danny had to be careful when he picked her up. One wrong move could paralyze her for life. He cradled her in his arms like a child and walked slowly through the corridor, checking every corner for enemies. The Vithrak found him halfway to the shuttle bay. 3 of them appeared from a side passage, their claws raised and their eyes burning. Danny didn't have a free hand to reach his weapon. He couldn't put Megan down, so he did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life. His boots pounded against the metal floor. His breath came in ragged gasps. The Vithrak chased him. Their claws scraping and clicking behind him. He could feel them getting closer. He could hear their hissing breath on the back of his neck. Danny reached the shuttle bay just as one of the Vithrak lunged at him. He dove through the airlock and rolled to the side. The alien's claws missed him by inches. Ryan Shaw appeared behind Danny and fired his rifle at the Vithrak, driving them back into the corridor. Danny put Megan down and tried to catch his breath. His heart was pounding so hard that he thought it might burst. His legs felt like they were made of water. But he couldn't rest. Not yet. Nathan Cole was still out there. Danny had seen him fall near the forward compartments. If he was still alive, he wouldn't be for long. Danny grabbed a fresh rifle from the shuttle's weapon locker and ran back into the corridor. Ryan Shaw tried to follow him, but Danny told him to stay and protect the wounded. The young cadet wanted to argue, but one look at Danny's face made him stop. He nodded and took up position near the airlock. Finding Nathan was harder than Danny expected. The forward compartments were a maze of broken pipes and collapsed walls. Danny had to crawl through gaps in the debris, squeezing his body through spaces that seemed too small for a human. His uniform tore on jagged metal. His skin scraped against rough edges. Blood started dripping from cuts he didn't remember getting. He found Nathan in a storage room, pinned under a heavy crate. The young man's legs were crushed and twisted at wrong angles. He was crying and calling for his mother. Danny knelt beside him and told him everything was going to be okay. He told him to hold on. He told him he was going to get him out of here. Danny braced his shoulder against the crate and pushed. The crate didn't move. He pushed harder. His muscles screamed. His bones creaked. The crate shifted an inch. Then another. Nathan screamed as the pressure on his legs changed. With one final push, Danny rolled the crate off Nathan's body. The young man's legs were ruined, but he was free. Danny grabbed him by the collar and started dragging him toward the shuttle bay. The trip back was the longest of Danny's life. Nathan couldn't walk at all, so Danny had to drag him the entire way. The young man's weight seemed to double with every step. Danny's back burned, his arms ached. Sweat poured down his face and mixed with the blood from his cuts. Halfway to the shuttle bay, a plasma bolt caught Danny in the side. He felt a burning pain explode through his ribs. He stumbled and fell to his knees. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. For a moment, he thought he was done. Then he heard Nathan whimpering behind him. The young man was looking up at Danny with wide, terrified eyes. He was depending on Danny. They all were. Danny gritted his teeth and stood up. The pain was incredible, but he pushed it aside. He grabbed Nathan's collar again and started walking. One step, then another, then another. He made it to the shuttle bay and collapsed next to the other cadets. Ryan Shaw rushed over and started checking his wound. Danny pushed him away and pointed at the corridor. Lisa Reyes was still out there. He had seen her near the cargo hold. Ryan tried to stop him. He said Danny was too hurt. He said Danny was going to die if he went back out there. Danny didn't listen. He grabbed a fresh clip for his rifle and headed back into the smoke. The corridor seemed longer this time. The smoke seemed thicker. The Vithrak seemed closer. But Danny kept moving. He crawled on his hands and knees when his legs gave out. He pulled himself forward with his fingers when his arms stopped working. He found Lisa behind a crate, surrounded by enemies. He killed them. He grabbed her. He dragged her to safety. And then, finally, his body gave up. He fell at the entrance to the shuttle bay just as the rescue teams arrived. Marines poured past him, their weapons blazing. Someone shouted his name. Someone grabbed his shoulders. Danny looked up at the ceiling and smiled. He had done it. He had saved them. Then everything went dark. Danny woke up slowly, like rising from deep water. At first, there was only darkness and silence. Then came the sounds. The soft beeping of machines. The hum of air flowing through vents. The distant murmur of voices somewhere far away. He opened his eyes and saw white. White ceiling. White walls. White sheets on the bed beneath him. For a moment, he thought he was dead. He thought this was what came after, but then he felt pain, sharp and real, spreading through his body like fire. Dead people didn't feel pain. He was alive. Danny tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't cooperate. His arms felt like they were made of stone. His legs wouldn't move at all. Tubes and wires ran from his body to machines beside his bed. Monitors beeped and flashed with numbers he didn't understand. He lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to remember what had happened. The freighter, the Vithrak, the cadets, the blood and smoke and screaming, it all came back to him in pieces, like fragments of a broken mirror. A door opened somewhere to his left. Danny turned his head and saw a woman in a white uniform walking toward him. She was young, with kind eyes and dark skin. Her name tag said Sophia. She was carrying a tray with water and pills. When she saw that Danny's eyes were open, she dropped the tray. Water splashed across the floor. Pills scattered in every direction. She stood there with her mouth open, staring at him like he was a ghost. Then she turned and ran out of the room, calling for doctors. The next few hours were a blur of tests and questions. Doctors poked and prodded Danny's body. Nurses changed his bandages and adjusted his medications. People in uniforms asked him questions about the attack, about the cadets, about what he remembered. Danny answered as best he could, but his mind was foggy. The drugs they were giving him made everything feel soft and distant. He kept asking about the cadets, about Amy and Kevin and the others. The doctors smiled and told him they were fine. They said he had saved them. They said he was a hero. Danny didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and broken and confused. But he nodded and let them run their tests. It was 3 days before Danny was strong enough to sit up in bed. It was a week before he could walk to the window and look outside. When he did, he saw Earth spread out below him, blue oceans and green continents, and white clouds swirling in endless patterns. He was in an orbital hospital, thousands of miles above the planet where he was born. That was when he noticed the flowers. His room was full of them, roses and lilies and flowers he didn't recognize. They covered every surface, filled every corner, spilled out into the hallway. There were cards attached to some of them, hundreds of cards with messages from people he had never met. Danny picked up one of the cards and read it. It said, "Thank you for your bravery." Another one said, "You are an inspiration to us all." A third one said, "My daughter wants to be like you when she grows up." Danny put the cards down and looked around the room again. On a table near the window, he saw a small box. Inside the box was a medal, gold and gleaming, with a ribbon of red and blue. There was a certificate beneath it with his name printed in large letters. He didn't understand. He was just a medic. He had just done his job. Why were people sending him flowers and medals? The answer came later that day, when Sophia the nurse brought him a datapad and showed him the news. The Vythrak attack on the freighter had been part of a larger invasion. Thousands of the aliens had poured through a breach in humanity's defenses and attacked colonies across the sector. The fighting had lasted for weeks. Many people had died, but in the end, humanity had won. The Vythrak had been pushed back into their own space, and somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, Danny had become famous. Sophia showed him the footage that had been recovered from the cadets' helmet cameras. Danny watched himself running through smoke-filled corridors with wounded soldiers on his back. He watched himself fighting Vythrak with nothing but a knife. He watched himself crawling through debris with blood streaming from his wounds, dragging cadets to safety one by one. The footage had been broadcast across every human colony. Billions of people had seen it. News programs played it on loop. Politicians gave speeches about it. Children in schools were taught about it. Danny Vance, the combat medic who refused to quit. Danny put the datapad down and stared at the wall. He didn't recognize the man in those videos. That man looked brave and strong and unstoppable. Danny remembered feeling scared. He remembered wanting to give up. He remembered the moment when his body had finally failed, and he had fallen to the ground, certain that he was going to die. He remembered the 3 cadets he couldn't save. The ones who had died before he could reach them. The ones whose names he had read in the reports the doctors showed him. Their faces haunted his dreams every night. Their screams echoed in his ears every time he closed his eyes. How could people call him a hero when he had failed to save everyone? Over the following weeks, Danny received visitors. Some of them were military officers who wanted to shake his hand and pin more medals on his chest. Some of them were reporters who wanted to interview him for their networks. Some of them were ordinary people who just wanted to say thank you. Danny met with all of them, but he never felt comfortable. He didn't know what to say when they praised him. He didn't know how to respond when they called him brave. He just nodded and smiled and waited for them to leave. The cadets came too. Amy Lawson was the first. She walked into his room on crutches, her leg wrapped in bandages but her eyes bright and alive. She hugged him and cried, and told him she would never forget what he had done. Kevin Torres came next, his chest wrapped in regeneration patches. He was quieter than Danny remembered, but he still managed to crack a few jokes. He said he owed Danny a drink when they both got out of here. Danny said he would hold him to that. Ryan Shaw came with Lisa Reyes. They stood at the foot of Danny's bed and didn't say anything for a long time. Then Ryan stepped forward and saluted. Lisa did the same. They held the salute until Danny told them to stop, his voice breaking with emotion. Megan Price sent a video message because she was still in surgery for her back. Nathan Cole wrote a letter because he was too emotional to speak. Both of them said the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on us. Danny read the letter and watched the video, alone in his room after everyone else had gone. He cried for the first time since waking up. He cried for the cadets he had saved. He cried for the ones he hadn't. He cried because he still didn't understand why any of this had happened to him. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, he started to feel something new. It wasn't pride exactly. It wasn't satisfaction. It was more like acceptance, like maybe, just maybe, he had done something that mattered. He wasn't ready to believe it yet. But he was getting closer. 2 months after waking up in the hospital, Danny received orders that changed everything. A message arrived on his datapad with the official seal of Terran High Command. It told him to report to Geneva within the week. It didn't say why. Danny spent the shuttle ride down to Earth, staring out the window. He watched the blue planet grow larger and larger until it filled his entire view. He had grown up on Earth, in a small town in Ohio where his father worked in a factory and his mother taught at the local school. He hadn't been back in years. The sight of it made his chest feel tight with emotions he couldn't name. The shuttle landed at a military base outside Geneva. A car was waiting for him, sleek and black with tinted windows. A driver in a crisp uniform opened the door and gestured for Danny to get in. Danny hesitated for a moment, then climbed inside. The car drove through the city without stopping. Danny watched the buildings pass by, ancient and modern mixed together in ways that seemed impossible. Stone cathedrals stood next to glass towers. Cobblestone streets ran alongside hovering transport lines. Everywhere he looked, there were people. Millions of people living their lives, unaware of the wars being fought in their name among the stars. The car stopped in front of a building Danny recognized from history lessons. The Hall of Terran Heritage. It was massive, built from white stone that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Columns rose toward the sky like the fingers of giants. Steps led up to doors that looked big enough for a starship to fly through. Danny got out of the car and stood there, staring. He had seen pictures of this place, but pictures couldn't capture its size. It made him feel small. It made him feel like nothing he had ever done could possibly matter compared to the history contained within those walls. A woman was waiting for him at the top of the steps. She was tall and straight, with silver hair cut short, and eyes that seemed to see everything. Her uniform was covered with medals and ribbons, more than Danny could count. He recognized her face from news broadcasts. Admiral Grace Kowalski, one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire Terran fleet. Danny climbed the steps and saluted. The Admiral returned the salute, and then did something Danny didn't expect. She smiled. She told Danny to walk with her. She said there was something she wanted to show him. Danny followed her through the massive doors and into the Hall of Terran Heritage. The inside of the building was even more impressive than the outside. The ceiling rose so high that Danny couldn't see the top. Holographic displays lined the walls, showing images of men and women from humanity's past. Explorers who had mapped the first exoplanets, scientists who had discovered faster-than-light travel, diplomats who had made peace with alien races, soldiers who had defended humanity against threats from beyond the stars. Danny walked past them all, feeling more out of place with every step. These were legends. These were the people who had shaped the course of human history. What was he doing here? The Admiral led him through corridor after corridor, deeper and deeper into the building. The displays became older as they walked. The faces became less familiar. Danny saw names he recognized from school, and names he had never heard before. All of them had done something incredible. All of them had earned their place in this hall. Finally, they reached a door at the end of a long hallway. It was smaller than the others, made from dark metal, with symbols carved into its surface. The Admiral stopped in front of it and turned to face Danny. She told him that behind this door was the Honor Archives. She said it was the most sacred place in the entire building. Only the most exceptional acts of courage were recorded there. Only the truest examples of what humanity could become. She asked Danny if he was ready to see what was inside. Danny didn't know what to say. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He had a feeling that whatever was behind that door would change him forever. But he nodded anyway. The Admiral pressed her hand against a panel on the wall. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Light spilled out into the hallway, warm and golden. Danny stepped through. The Honor Archives were beautiful. The room was circular, with walls that curved up toward a dome of glass that showed the sky above. Holographic pillars stood in rows, each one showing the face of a different person. Their names floated beneath their images in letters of light. Their stories played on loop, telling tales of sacrifice and bravery that made Danny's throat tighten. The Admiral led Danny to a pillar near the center of the room. She stopped in front of it and stepped aside. Danny looked up and saw his own face staring back at him. The hologram showed him in his combat medic uniform, the same one he had worn on the freighter. His expression was determined and fierce, nothing like the confusion he felt right now. Beneath the image, words floated in golden letters. Sergeant Danny Vance. Kepler Station Incident. 2000. 347. 9 lives, saved under fire. Wounded 5 times. Never stopped moving. Danny stared at the words until they blurred. His eyes were burning. His chest felt like it was being crushed by something heavy and invisible. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. He could only stand there and look at his own name etched in light among the greatest heroes humanity had ever known. The Admiral spoke quietly beside him. She told him that when the Vithrak intercepted the footage from the freighter, they had studied it carefully. They had watched Danny run through fire again and again, saving lives that logic said should have been lost. They had analyzed his movements, his decisions, his refusal to surrender even when his body was failing. She said the Vithrak had no answer for what they saw. They couldn't understand it. In their culture, wounded soldiers were left behind. Resources were not wasted on the dying. The idea that one person would risk everything to save others made no sense to them. She told Danny that was why the footage had been broadcast across human space. Not just because it was inspiring, but because it showed something the Vithrak could never understand, something that made humanity different from every other species in the galaxy. She called it love. Love for strangers. Love for people who had no claim on you. Love that made you crawl through fire and blood and death. Because leaving someone behind was simply not an option. Danny thought about his father back in Ohio. He remembered sitting on the porch as a child, listening to the old man talk about life. His father had never been a soldier. He had never done anything that would put him in a place like this. But he had taught Danny the only lesson that really mattered. Do the right thing. Even when it hurts. Even when no one is watching. Even when it costs you everything. Danny reached out and touched the hologram. His fingers passed through the light, warm and tingling. He thought about the cadets he had saved. He thought about Amy and Kevin and Ryan and all the others. He thought about the letters they had written and the tears they had shed. He thought about the 3 cadets he couldn't save. He wondered if they would forgive him for living when they had died. He wondered if his being here, in this sacred place, honored their memory or insulted it. The Admiral seemed to read his thoughts. She put a hand on his shoulder and told him that no one could save everyone. She said the measure of a person wasn't whether they succeeded, but whether they tried. She said the 3 cadets who died would have wanted him to be here. They would have been proud. Danny nodded, but he didn't say anything. He just stood there in the golden light, looking at his name among the heroes, and tried to figure out who he was supposed to be now. 6 months after standing in the honor archives, Danny Vance returned to duty, but not as a combat medic. The Terran Defense Academy had offered him a position as an instructor, and, after a lot of thought, he had accepted. His body still carried the scars from the freighter. His side ached when it rained. His hands shook sometimes for no reason at all, but his mind was clear. And his heart was full of something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. His first day at the academy was harder than any mission he had ever been on. The classroom was full of young faces, all of them staring at him with a mixture of awe and fear. They knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. That made everything more difficult. But then Danny looked at the front row and saw 2 familiar faces. Ryan Shaw, now wearing the uniform of a full ensign, sat with his back straight and his eyes focused. Beside him was Lisa Reyes, who walked with a slight limp from the injury she had received on the freighter. They had both requested transfer to Danny's first class. They wanted to learn from the man who had saved their lives. Danny took a deep breath and started talking. He didn't talk about the freighter. He didn't talk about the medals or the honor archives or the news broadcasts that had made him famous. Instead, he talked about the things that mattered: how to stay calm when everything around you was falling apart, how to trust the person standing next to you, how to keep moving forward when every part of your body was screaming at you to stop. He told them that being a soldier wasn't about being brave. It was about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. He told them that heroes weren't born, they were made. Made by choices, made by moments, made by deciding, again and again, to put others before yourself. The cadets listened in silence. Some of them took notes. Others just watched Danny with wide eyes, hanging on every word. When the class was over, they filed out slowly, whispering among themselves about what they had heard. Ryan Shaw stayed behind. He walked up to Danny's desk and stood there for a moment, not saying anything. Then he asked Danny how he did it, how he kept going back into that corridor when he knew he was probably going to die. Danny thought about the question for a long time before answering. He said he didn't know. He said something inside him just wouldn't let him stop. He said maybe it was training, or instinct, or something deeper that he couldn't explain. He said sometimes the body knows what to do even when the mind has given up. Ryan nodded slowly. He looked like he was trying to memorize every word. Then he saluted and left the room. Years passed. Danny taught hundreds of cadets, watching them grow from nervous children into confident soldiers. Some of them went on to great things. Some of them died in battles on distant worlds. Every time Danny heard about one of his students falling in combat, he felt a piece of himself die with them. But he kept teaching. He kept sharing what he knew. Because that was all he could do. He never married. He never had children of his own. The academy became his family, and his students became his sons and daughters. He watched them graduate and ship out to the stars, carrying pieces of him with them wherever they went. Sometimes, late at night when the academy was quiet and empty, Danny would walk through the halls and think about his life. He thought about the choices he had made and the roads he hadn't taken. He thought about the cadets he had saved on the freighter and wondered what had happened to them. He found out over the years, piece by piece, Amy Lawson became a ship captain, commanding a cruiser that patrolled the frontier. Kevin Torres went into politics and eventually became a senator who fought for veterans' rights. Megan Price became a doctor who specialized in treating combat injuries. Nathan Cole, whose legs had never fully healed, became a teacher like Danny, training the next generation of medics. They all kept in touch. They sent Danny messages on holidays and visited him when they could. They never forgot what he had done for them, and Danny never forgot them. When Danny was 60 years old, he retired from the academy. His body had finally worn out, too broken by old wounds and long years to keep going. He moved to a quiet colony on the frontier, a small world with green forests and clean air and stars that seemed close enough to touch. He spent his days reading and gardening and watching ships pass overhead on their way to distant places. He didn't miss the war. He didn't miss the violence and the fear and the endless parade of young faces marching off to die. But sometimes, on clear nights when the sky was full of stars, he felt a strange longing for something he couldn't name. One evening, a young woman came to visit him. She was small and dark-haired, with bright eyes that reminded Danny of someone he used to know. She introduced herself as Lily Lawson. She said her grandmother was Amy Lawson. She said she had come a long way to meet him. Danny invited her inside and made tea. They sat on his porch and watched the sun set over the forest while she told him about her life. She was a cadet at the academy, following in her grandmother's footsteps. She wanted to be a ship captain someday. Then she asked Danny a question that made him stop and think. She asked if he was really the man from the archives, the one who had saved all those people on the freighter so many years ago. Danny smiled and said he was just someone who got lucky. He said he was in the right place at the right time and did what anyone would have done, but Lily shook her head. She told him that her grandmother had told her stories about that day for as long as she could remember. She said her whole family existed because of what Danny had done. She said that across 100 worlds, children learned his name alongside the founders and the pioneers. She said he wasn't just a man who got lucky. He was proof of what humanity could be when it mattered most. Danny didn't know what to say. He looked out at the stars, at the distant lights of ships carrying humanity ever outward into the unknown. He thought about all the years that had passed, and all the lives that had been touched by what happened on that freighter. He thought about his father, and the lessons he had taught. He thought about the cadets he had trained and the battles they had fought. And finally, after all those years, Danny allowed himself to believe it. He had done something that mattered. He had made a difference. Not because he was special, or brave, or different from anyone else, but because when the moment came, he had chosen to act. He had chosen to put others before himself. He had chosen to keep moving forward when everything inside him wanted to stop. That was his legacy. Not the medals or the archives or the stories told in schools across the galaxy, but the simple truth that one person, doing the right thing at the right time, could change the course of history. Danny sat on his porch with Lily beside him and watched the stars come out, one by one. He thought about all the people out there among those stars, living and dying and fighting for something they believed in. He hoped they would be brave. He hoped they would be kind. He hoped that when their moment came, they would remember what he had tried to teach them. Never give up. Never leave anyone behind. And always, always keep moving forward. The stars burned bright above him, eternal and unchanging. And somewhere out there, in archives and memories, and the hearts of those who remembered, Danny Vance's name would live on forever.